You have given your children everything. Not just money, your time, your sleep, your worry, decades of showing up for their problems, their setbacks, their emergencies, their fresh starts that needed a little help to get going. And now you're past 60, and they're adults. And you told yourself that part was over, but the calls still come, the needs still come, and something in you, something deep and old and stubborn, still cannot say no. If that's you, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not weak for feeling that, you are not foolish, you are a parent. And the instinct to help your children does not have an off switch. But here is what nobody talks about. What happens to the parent who never stopped helping, who gave when he should have held back, who said yes one more time and then one more time after that, until the yes became a habit he couldn't afford? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand something that might be the most important financial truth of this stage of your life, and you'll have the words to start doing something about it. I want to tell you about a man I'll call Frank. Frank spent 43 years working. He started young, barely out of high school, loading trucks at a distribution warehouse, and he worked his way up through persistence and patience and the particular kind of stubbornness that keeps a man going when the work is hard and the hours are long and nobody is watching. He raised 3 children, paid for 2 college educations out of pocket, helped the third start a small business, attended every game, every recital, every graduation, paid the dental bills and the car insurance and the first and last month's rent when each of them got their first apartment. He was, by any measure, a good father. And then Frank turned 62, and the children were in their 30s, each of them established enough in their lives that most people looking in from the outside would have said, "They're fine, they've got it." But the calls kept coming. His oldest, going through a difficult divorce, needed help with attorney fees, just for a few months, until things settled. His middle son had lost his job, not his fault. The company had downsized, and needed help covering his mortgage for a few months until he landed somewhere new. His youngest, the one with the small business, needed another infusion. The business was turning the corner, she said, just needed a little more runway. Frank helped, each time, because that's what Frank did. Because saying no to his children felt, to Frank, like a betrayal of everything he'd spent his life being. And because each situation, taken individually, made sense. Each one had a reason, a story, a timeline that seemed reasonable, and a plan that seemed solid. What Frank didn't see, what he wouldn't let himself see for a long time, was the cumulative picture. Over the course of 8 years, from 62 to 70, Frank redirected a substantial portion of what he had saved for his own retirement into the lives of his adult children. Not all at once, in pieces, in moments of need, one at a time, each one justifiable on its own terms. When Frank finally sat down, really sat down the way a man sometimes has to be forced to, and looked at what remained, the number on the page was not what he expected. He was 70 years old. His health was beginning to require attention, his own expenses were growing, and what should have been a comfortable cushion for this stage of his life had been redistributed, quietly, year by year, into problems that were not his to solve. Frank told me on a November afternoon, sitting in his kitchen with the kind of honesty that only comes after a man has made peace with something he can't undo. He said, "I thought I was helping them. I thought that was what love looked like. And maybe it was, some of the time. But somewhere in there, it stopped being love and started being something I couldn't name, something I couldn't say no to. And by the time I understood the difference, I'd spent something I couldn't get back." The stories in this video are composite illustrations, patterns drawn from many real lives, shaped into something recognizable. They are not about any one person, and nothing in this video is financial or legal advice. These are reflections from a long life and many conversations, offered in the hope that they might help you see your own situation a little more clearly. Now, let me walk you through why this happens, and then, more importantly, what you can do about it. Why it happens. The guilt that doesn't have an off switch. Let's start with the honest truth about why men like Frank keep saying yes long after yes has stopped making sense. It is guilt, not always the dramatic kind, not the guilt that comes from having done something wrong, the quieter kind. The kind that whispers when the phone rings and you see your child's name on the screen. The kind that says, if you don't help, you're not a good father. If you say no, you're choosing your own comfort over your family. If you hold back, you're using money as a substitute for love, and what kind of man does that? Men of our generation were raised with a particular idea of what a provider looks like. A provider shows up. A provider fixes things. A provider does not say I can't or I won't to his own children, not if there's any possible way to avoid it. That identity, provider, runs so deep in many of us that it has no natural endpoint. It doesn't stop when the children turn 18. It doesn't stop when they graduate. It doesn't stop when they marry or have children of their own. It simply continues, because the identity is not contingent on circumstances, it's just who we believe we are. And so we keep writing the checks, we keep making the transfers, we keep saying just this once, knowing, somewhere beneath that phrase, that once is never what it is. A man I'll call Raymond, 73, retired from a long career in manufacturing, told me that for 15 years after his retirement, he never once turned down a request from his son. Not once. I told myself every time that it was the right thing, he said, and maybe each time on its own it was, but together, all of it together, it was something different. It was my future, my security, my ability to get through whatever's coming without depending on somebody else. I gave all of that away, one good reason at a time. Why adult children keep asking, and why that's not entirely their fault. I want to say something that might be uncomfortable, not to blame anyone, but because the honest picture matters. When a parent consistently provides financial help, when the answer to I need money has always been yes, or almost always, or yes after a brief conversation, something happens, not maliciously, not consciously often, but it happens. The adult child learns that this is available. They learn that dad is a resource that can be accessed when things get difficult, and because they are human beings who have been shaped, in part by what their parents have always been willing to do for them, they don't always think critically about whether they should be asking. They simply ask, because that's what has always been possible. This is not an accusation, it is a description of a human dynamic that plays out in families all over the country all the time. A man I'll call Henry had 4 adult children. 3 of them had, over the years, developed a reliable habit of reaching out to Henry in financial difficulty. They were not bad children, they loved their father genuinely and openly. But because Henry had never once allowed a financial problem in their lives to go unaddressed by him, they had never developed the full musculature required to solve those problems on their own. I didn't let them build that muscle, Henry told me, because I was always there to lift the weight for them. And now, when I'm at an age where I can't keep lifting indefinitely, they don't know any other way. The hard truth that many parents carry privately, the one they don't say at family dinners, is this: some of the help they provided over the years made their children's lives easier without making their children stronger. That is not a failure of love. It is the natural consequence of loving completely and giving freely, without fully considering what the giving teaches, what it costs you, the part nobody talks about out loud. Let me be plain about something that financial reality requires us to face honestly. At 60, 65, 70, the financial mistakes you can recover from are getting fewer, not because you're less capable, but because the timeline for recovery is shorter. When you were 40 and made a financial error, spent too much, gave too much, lost something to a bad decision, you had decades to rebuild. 20 years of work, of saving, of compound growth can cover a great deal. At 70, you don't have those decades. If a significant portion of your retirement savings leaves your account into a child's mortgage, a grandchild's tuition, a family member's business, it is very difficult to replace. In many cases, it is impossible, and the consequences of that don't arrive all at once. They arrive slowly, in the form of choices you can no longer make comfortably, in the form of bills that are slightly harder to manage than they should be, in the form of a quiet, grinding anxiety that sits in the background of your days and never quite goes away. A man I'll call Walter, 68 years old, in good health, with a pension and modest savings, found himself at 73 in a position he had never imagined. His savings had been substantially reduced through a series of generous contributions to his children's lives over the previous 5 years. Each contribution had made sense at the time. Together they had hollowed out a cushion he had spent decades building. When a health issue arose, nothing catastrophic, but the kind of thing that requires consistent ongoing attention, Walter discovered that managing the cost was more complicated than it should have been. The money that should have been there was gone, in his children's lives, in their houses and their businesses and their fresh starts. Walter did not resent his children. He loved them without reservation, but he told me with a quietness that I still remember, "I wish someone had told me not to stop giving, but to put on my own mask first, because now I need help, and the one thing I never wanted to be, a burden to the people I love. That's exactly what I'm worried about becoming." There is a phrase used in airplane safety instructions that many financial counselors have borrowed because it is so precisely right. Put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. This is not selfishness. This is the recognition that you cannot help anyone from a position of collapse. That the most loving thing you can do for your children long term is to remain financially stable, so that you are never their burden, so that your care never becomes their obligation, so that the life you've built doesn't become a crisis that lands in their laps at the worst possible time. What helping too much actually does to your children. Let me turn the camera around for a moment, because this conversation is usually framed around what it costs the parent, and that cost is real. But there is another cost that gets talked about even less. What sustained financial support from parents does to adult children over time. Human beings develop the capacity to navigate difficulty through navigating difficulty, not by reading about it, not by watching someone else solve it, by doing it, by facing a problem with no easy exit and finding their way through. When a parent consistently provides that easy exit, when the financial emergency always has a solution waiting one phone call away, the adult child is protected from the experience that would have taught them something essential. They don't develop the relationship with their own finances that comes from having to be fully responsible for them. They don't build the problem-solving muscle that comes from having to look at a difficult situation and find a way through it, using only what they have. They remain, in some subtle and significant way, one step removed from the full weight of their own adult lives. A man I'll call Douglas had 2 adult sons. He had helped the older one financially many times over the years. The younger one, by circumstance more than design, had always had to figure things out for himself. Douglas had simply had less capacity during the years that son was finding his feet. When Douglas compared the 2 men at 40, their relationship with money, their ability to handle setbacks, their sense of efficacy in the world, the difference was meaningful. The one I helped less, Douglas told me, handles hard things better. I don't know exactly how to feel about that, but I can't pretend I don't see it. Helping your children through genuine crisis is a different thing. That is what parents are for, in part. But helping your children avoid the natural consequences of their own decisions, that is something different. That is protection that costs them something they didn't know they were paying. The difference between helping and enabling. I want to draw a line here carefully, because this matters. There is a version of helping that is genuine and necessary and good. A child faces a true emergency, a serious illness, a sudden job loss in a genuinely difficult market. A situation that could not have been prevented and cannot be navigated without outside support. In those moments, a parent who is able to help, and chooses to help, is doing something right. That is not what I've been talking about today. What I've been talking about is the pattern, the repeated, habitual, ongoing financial supplement that flows from parent to adult child, not because of emergencies but because of lifestyle. Because the adult child has come to live at a level that requires parental subsidy to maintain, because the cushion of mom and dad's generosity has become baked into how things work. The difference between helping and enabling is not always obvious in any single moment. It becomes clear over time. Helping moves toward independence. It has a defined purpose and a defined end. It builds toward the adult child needing less, not more. Enabling moves toward dependence. Each instance of help creates the conditions for the next one. The need never decreases. The requests don't taper off. If anything, they grow. A man I'll call Chester had been giving his daughter a monthly sum, not enormous but meaningful, for over 6 years. It had started as temporary, a bridge payment while she got back on her feet after a difficult period. 6 years later, she was on her feet, had been for years, but the payment continued because ending it had never been explicitly discussed. It had simply become part of the landscape. When Chester finally raised the conversation, gently, lovingly but directly, his daughter's initial reaction surprised him. She had, without realizing it, fully incorporated that monthly amount into her budget. It wasn't extra, it was expected. She wasn't taking advantage of me, Chester said carefully. She just forgot it wasn't hers. And honestly, I let that happen. That conversation changed things, not easily, not without some difficulty in the relationship for a period of time, but it changed things. Chester's daughter found ways to manage that she hadn't known she needed to find. She became in the process more capable and more confident, and Chester reclaimed a portion of his own financial security that he had given away 1 month at a time without ever meaning to give it permanently. How to have the conversation, if you're ready to have it. I want to speak practically for a moment, because knowing the problem is not the same as knowing how to address it. If you are in a pattern of financial support with an adult child, a pattern that has been going on for a while, that you have mixed feelings about, that you are beginning to recognize is not sustainable for you, at some point, the conversation has to happen. Not an argument, not an accusation, a conversation. And the conversation is not about what they did wrong, it is about what you need. That distinction matters enormously. I've been worried about you and I don't want to see you struggle is a conversation about them. I need to make some changes to how I manage my own finances going forward is a conversation about you. The second conversation is harder to argue with, because it is honest. It is about your situation, your needs, your security, not about their failures or their choices or their ability to manage their own lives. A man I'll call Gerald told his son, at 71, that he was going to be making some changes to his monthly expenses, reviewing everything, tightening things up, making sure he had what he needed for the years ahead, that the informal arrangement they'd had needed to wind down over the next few months. He said it calmly, he said it clearly, he said it once without apologizing for it. His son was quiet for a moment, then said, "Okay, Dad, I figured this was coming." Gerald told me he knew. He knew the whole time it wasn't permanent. He just needed me to say it out loud. Not every conversation will go that smoothly. Some will be harder. Some will come with pushback or hurt feelings or a period of distance that is painful to endure, but the conversation is still worth having, because the alternative, continuing indefinitely, in silence, out of love and guilt and the inability to say the word no, has its own cost, and that cost is paid by you alone, in private, 1 month at a time. What it looks like to get this right. I don't want to end this video on a hard note, because the point is not to make you feel guilty about the help you've given, or frightened about what it may have cost you, or resentful toward the people you love. The point is to give you something useful. So let me tell you about a man I'll call Arthur. Arthur made the decision at 64 that he was going to draw a clear line, not because he didn't love his children, because he did. He sat his 2 adult sons down, not in an atmosphere of crisis, not in response to a request, but proactively, and told them plainly what his retirement looked like, what he had, what he needed it to do, what margin, if any, he had for helping them in the future. He did not share every number, he did not open his accounts, but he gave them an honest picture of what was possible and what was not. I told them I loved them more than anything, Arthur said, and that because I love them I need to be honest about what I can and can't do, and that the best thing I can give them at this point is not more money, it's not becoming a problem they have to solve. His sons received it better than he had expected, not perfectly. The older one needed some time, but both of them ultimately told him they were glad he'd said something. Glad to know, glad not to be wondering. The love didn't diminish. If anything, it became cleaner, clearer, less complicated by the financial undercurrent that had always been running quietly beneath the surface. Arthur told me a year later, I slept better after that conversation. For the first time in years I slept better. So here is what I want to leave you with. You have given generously. That is not the problem. Generosity is not the problem. The problem, if there is one, is giving without a plan, giving without limits, giving from a place of guilt rather than genuine choice, giving in a way that costs you more than you can afford, in the years when you can least afford to lose it. You are allowed to put yourself first now, not instead of your children, not in opposition to them, but first, in the specific sense that your financial security, your ability to cover your own health care, your own housing, your own daily life without depending on anyone else, that has to be the foundation. Everything else gets built on top of that foundation, not beneath it, on top of it. Your children need you to be okay, not just for your sake, for theirs. A parent who is financially stable, who is not anxious about money, who is not silently depleted by the ongoing cost of holding everyone else up, that parent is present in a way that matters. That parent is not a burden waiting to happen. That parent is a gift that keeps being a gift. That is what taking care of yourself gives your children. Not less love, more of you. If something in this landed for you today, if Frank's story felt familiar or Arthur's felt like something you want to reach for, I'd be glad to hear from you in the comments. You don't have to share more than you're comfortable with, but sometimes just knowing another man has carried the same thing and found a way through it is enough to help you take the first step. Take care of yourself. I'll see